The Brass Legionnaire. First book in the Steam Empire Chronicles. Written by Daniel Ottalini. Read by Russell Ottalini. Chapter 1. Working his wrench with the deftness of long experience, Julius Brutus Caesar tightened the bolt on the exposed sprocket. When it was connected to the rest of the engine, the engineers could begin the final assembly of yet another mechanophant. Not for the first time, Julius wondered why on earth someone had the desire to invent such a mechanical monstrosity in the first place, although, he had to admit, it was impressive. Standing over 15 imperial feet tall, with a protected driver's seat and razor-sharp chain tusks, it was perfect for crashing through the center of an enemy's battle line, especially when combined with other mechanophants in a thunderous charge. Julius shook his head to clear his wandering mind and studied his work in the light from the gas lanterns burning all around the factory. He wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, product of his exertion despite the large open windows far above his head, just below the steam pipes haphazardly crisscrossing near the ceiling amidst spindly gantries and support struts. The whole factory was a safety inspector's nightmare, but of course the inspector had been bribed, so the whole situation was swept under the rug, so to speak. Much better, he thought as he carefully cleaned his wrench with a dirty rag pulled from a pouch on his utility belt. A loud whistle sounded. Tucking the rag back into his belt, Julius trudged across the factory floor toward the massive steel doors, their paint peeling around splotches of rust. The air smelled of bitter industrial coolants, welding smoke, and various other chemicals despite the fresh air that carried the sounds and smells of Brittenberg through the windows. Julius nodded greetings to several other workers as they all moved toward the pay office. Being Friday, it was payday. He hoped the overtime he'd been working would make a difference this period. Julius's father had been injured several years ago in the same factory, when part of a mechanophant collapsed during construction. Marcus Caesar had required hospitalization as well as a complete leg replacement. The medical bills continued to pile up, and it was all Julius could do, as the main family breadwinner now, to stave off eviction from their small sledge-bottom apartment. With 3 other family members to support, Julius had thrown himself into his job at the factory, hoping to impress his supervisors enough to be promoted and get a raise. The workers quietly queued up before the office window, waiting while the paymaster carefully checked his charts and notes before grudgingly handing over a small handful of copper and silver coins to each worker. "Caesar, Julius B.," Julius told the attendant as he stepped up to the window. "Here you go, Julius, and don't bother counting. I added in what you earned in overtime, so no complaining." The paymaster's gruff rumble contrasted with his thin, weedy appearance. His lips, nearly concealed by a thin, droopy mustache, barely moved as he talked. Ignoring him, Julius did a quick count of the coins. "That's all?" he asked incredulously. It was barely more than he had earned in the last period. "I was here for 30 extra hours this week." "Oh, yeah?" the older man sneered. "Well, money don't grow on trees, you know. Since you're our resident emperor, how about you just command money to appear?" "Ha!" He doubled over, his laughter mingled with coughing. Julius glared. "You're a real Plato, aren't you?" he mumbled as he scooped up his denarii and walked through the steel factory doors into the murky sunlight of a Brittenberg afternoon, once again cursing his family for naming him after the founder of the empire. Outside the cobblestone streets of Brittenberg, otherwise known as Majoris Brittenbergia, factory city and capital of the Imperial Roman province of Germania Inferior, were filled with people, machines, and animals. Julius navigated past booksellers, out-of-town merchants, a pair of barbarians with matching trousers and face tattoos standing next to an aviator in a long leather flying jacket, goggles hanging around his neck, and a group of schoolchildren being herded along by a matronly woman and a portly teacher. Julius's home was on the west side of town, almost right against the massive curtain wall that was both defensive fortification and bay dike. The area was dark, dank, and affectionately known as Sludge Bottom to the rest of the city. On a whim, Julius stepped over the electrified rails of the motor trolleys and entered a bakery, the opening door triggering a mechanical bird in the corner to squawk, "Customer! Customer!" An older woman wearing a smock over her gray dress walked out of the back. Recognizing him, she waved a greeting. "Hello, Julius. Picking up groceries for the family?" "Nah, just grabbing a snack." He looked carefully through the clouded glass display windows. "Are those honey nut tarts?" he asked excitedly. The heavily glazed treats were a traditional Brittenberg dessert and snack food, popular from the lowest plebeian to the governor himself, who was rumored to have devoured trays of them on his own. "Absolutely. You know how hard they are to keep in stock. Ignatius is starting another batch to make sure we have enough for tomorrow." She handed him the bread with one hand and a small, delicate box with the other. "Take the run to the batch for free. It will go stale otherwise. And make sure your sister gets at least a bite," she shouted at him as his smile went from overjoyed to smirk in a heartbeat. "Crumbs count as a bite, don't they?" he quipped as he paid for the loaf of bread. It was still warm as he wrapped it in paper against the chill in the air. Fall was coming to the city, and with it the rainy season that made living in Brittenberg all the more challenging. A horn called nearby as he paused at a street corner to tear off a chunk of bread, and he found himself wandering closer to see what the fuss was about. A short, stocky man with an amplification device stood on a raised platform, haranguing the crowd. "Patricians and plebeians, servants and republicans, my countrymen, the imperial army is recruiting. We have need of good, strapping young men to join our army. Join the newest, most extraordinary legion, the 13th Germania. The imperial senate clamors for war. Will you join your countrymen to bring punishment and pain to these barbarians and bloodthirsty raiders, those dastardly pillagers and savages who steal children, destroy livelihoods, enslave our women, and kill our men? Will you join with me?" His voice echoed through the square as the crowd cheered. A throng of young men rushed to the smoking steam wagons to sign up for enlistment. Although the Empire had long ago eliminated the compulsory military service for all male citizens, many families continued to see military service as a constant, required duty. The military paid well and consistently, no small feat for an empire stretching over half the known world. For a moment Julius considered enlisting. He was the right age and was in great shape, both mentally and physically. But he doubted his ability to complete training and earn a place as a legionary in the imperial legions. He watched as, one by one, the men were led into an enclosed steam wagon where, presumably, they would be examined to see if they were fit for duty. He walked closer, and suddenly the speech-giving Legionnaire was right in front of him. "Good day, son. Looking for a little excitement and a chance to see the world?" he asked. Julius considered. Although that did sound fun and exciting, he had more practical things to worry about. "I'd love to, but I've got to take care of my family here." The legionary smiled knowingly and scanned Julius top to bottom with his eyes. Apparently Julius passed muster, because he said, "Do you know about the signing bonus? And the monthly paychecks? We can have them deposited straight to your bank account here. If your parents have telecom service, you can even hear them over the wireless when at base." Julius was intrigued. "How much is the signing bonus?" The Legionnaire named a figure. Julius's eyebrows rose. "I can tell you need some time to think about it. But don't take too long, and miss out on this chance. The army offers mobility, and a chance to improve your life. Don't stay here and be a slave cog in some factory for the rest of your life. That's not much to tell your grandkids about." The man's eyes met Julius's, eyes that had seen way too much in this world. "I wouldn't trade my experiences for anything." He seemed to have read Julius's mind. "We'll be here for 3 more days. Simply ask for us at the Auxilia barracks. Then we march for Camp Titus near the Black Forest. You get the signing bonus the moment you sign on the dotted line, and receive the tin Aquila, the symbol of being a legionnaire in training. I'm Duplicarius Apollonius, head recruiter." The soldier shook his hand and moved off into the crowd. Julius resumed his walk home, his heart beating a little faster as he envisioned himself proudly wearing the uniform of the Legion. His only worry was how he would convince his parents. Marcus Caesar's well-calloused fist slammed into the scuffed dinner table. "No! No, no, no! No son of mine is going to join the legions. You are this," he held up his thumb and forefinger nearly touching, "close to getting that promotion. I can feel it in my bones. Even my metal ones," he quipped, slapping his hand on his brass replacement leg, making a hollow sound. 2 pairs of brown eyes stared at each other across the table. A few years ago, Julius would not have been able to hold that stare for long. His father's eyes had seen much in the last few years. Living in one of the poorest areas of the city had been a drain on his father, both mentally and physically. The lines on his face were deeper, and black and curly hair was now peppered with gray hairs that hadn't been there before. He cracked a nut in his hand and popped it into his mouth. "Aurelia, give me a hand here." "Now, Marcus," said a soft voice from the sink. Aurelia Marcia stood at the sink, washing dishes. Ever since they'd been able to pay for household help, Aurelia had been forced to pick up much of the slack. Her slender, narrow-boned figure moved slightly as her hands used the dish rag to wash the dirty plates and cups. "He's old enough now to make his own decisions. I don't want him joining the legions either, but we're at peace. You know a peacetime army needs little more than march in circles and look nice for the praetors." Marcus looked peeved. "I am still the paterfamilias of this household, and I say you will not be joining the legions." His voice was actually louder now. Julius had never heard his father yell before. He preferred to convince his children to follow a certain path, rather than simply demand that they follow his will. The creaking sounds of floorboards and pitter-patter of small feet indicated that 7-year-old Marciana had entered the room. "Mama, why is Papa yelling?" the thin child asked, her brown curls jostling as she moved to her mother's side. Aurelia gave her husband a tired look as she dried her hands on her apron. She placed the last of the dishes into the auto-dryer, turned the crank, and walked away as the machine began to emit a low-pitched whine. Marcus pushed his chair back and stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. His mechanical leg squealed and hissed, finally settling into the groove of walking as his leg bent and flexed at the knee joint. He walked over to the auto-dryer and smacked it on the side. "Holy Emperor, this stupid piece of scrap metal never seems to work." He smacked it again for good measure, and the machine's whine turned into a low, steady hum. "I'm amazed it's kept together this long. Gonna have to break out the wrench spanner tomorrow and take this thing apart to see where the wires crossed." He turned to look at Julius. "You'll help me, right?" His voice almost seemed to plead. Julius mustered his courage. "Father, I know it's been hard for us, but this is our way out. The army pays better than the factory does. They also offer a signing bonus. 25 denarii. That will pay off our loans, and you'll own this place. I'll even have my pay sent back here, so Marciana can go to school, and you and Mama won't have to worry." Julius set his mug down on the table. His hands felt the cup's cracks, repaired again and again by his mother to stretch every coin they had. "We need the money. It's the only thing we can do." His father was staring out the window over the kitchen sink, gazing at the sparkling glass and gas lights of the city around them. A clattering steam wagon chugged through the streets below them, metal wheels scratching against the street surface. "Looks like fog tonight," his voice rumbled low. He turned to give one brief glance at his only son, still waiting on the 3-legged stool at the table. Julius could see the old man's eyes partially glazed over as he looked at his son. "I wonder what he is seeing." With a small jerk of his head, Marcus's attention came back to the present. "You cannot leave. You do not have my blessing," he managed to say, voice choked with emotion. He stumped out of the room. Julius sighed.